Hello and welcome to another episode of Northwest Book Talk on 99.9 KXRW. This is the show focused entirely on books. With each episode, we explore books, authors, and anything related to books in the Pacific Northwest. I'm Patty Grasher, and in this episode, my guest is Ruby McConnell. Ruby is an author, registered geologist, and outdoor adventurer who writes extensively about the Pacific Northwest. If you want to deepen your experience of the wonders and beauty of our natural landscape and discover the healing and restorative powers available through nature, stay tuned. Welcome, Ruby, to Northwest Book Talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Ruby, let's start a bit with your background and what initially sparked your interest in geology.
So I grew up in Oregon and was an outdoor kid by virtue of summer camp, and was lucky enough to go to a summer camp that really emphasized life sciences. It was on the Oregon coast. It included a lot of geology alongside its life sciences and like the marine biology that we were studying. So I think I was really keyed in to the earth sciences at a young age, even though it's not necessarily something that like public high schools focus on. And when I got to university, I was a general science and environmental studies major. That was an emergent field. I found a wonderful female mentor, a professor that I started doing research with. And at some point she came to me and said, I have this amazing project working on Mount St. Helens, which for people who are interested in volcanoes is a really big deal. And she said, I will give you this project, but you have to change your major to geology. And that was sort of late in the game. And I did it anyway. And I never looked back. It was really just a fundamental moment in my life. Geology is a gift to anyone who studies it in terms of how it changes your perspective on the world. So I'm forever grateful for that moment.
So that's pretty powerful to make that kind of almost a gut-wrenching decision, I would say, when you're invested so much in your education already. So you said you never looked back. So how did it go forward with that? How was your experience on St. Helens and some of the processes that you learned?
My experience as a student of geology was really extraordinary. I can't recommend it enough for people who want to be outside and for young people that want to experience, travel and to see the world. As a researching undergraduate and then later graduate student, you get to just meet amazing, incredible people that work in the far reaches of the world. And I found it very exciting. I did my graduate work at Northern Arizona University and studied active volcanism in the Trans-Mexican Volcanic Belt, which was an extraordinary opportunity for me. And then when I came out of school, discovered in a way that was more surprising to me than perhaps it should have been, that there was really not a huge market for active volcanologists in the world, and had to, even though at that time Mount St. Helens was in fact erupting. But it was doing it in a small, sort of cute, very touristy, approachable way, and not in a job-generating way. So I stumbled into the world of environmental geology, which was really something that was outside of the range of education that I had received. I don't think that it's a part of the curriculum for a lot of geology degrees. And environmental geology focuses on soil and groundwater contamination, cleanup and remediation, and then also was able to do a lot of hazards work eventually as I got into that. I was a working geologist for a long time until the Great Recession sort of killed that market, because so much of that is driven by development, which of course came to a halt. So that's when I pivoted to writing.
So what moved you to getting behind the pen and writing?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the answer is I kept looking for a book that didn't exist on the shelves. And at some point, my skill set matched the ability to write the book. And the book still wasn't on the shelf. So I went ahead and wrote the book. And that was A Woman's Guide to the Wild. So I had spent, most of all of my young adulthood as an outdoors person in some of the most dangerous and magnificent landscapes in the world, and had done so without being able to find an outdoor guide that spoke to women and women's perspectives and women's needs, which are in fact unique and different than perhaps our male counterparts. I was doing my job with equipment that wasn't suited to, the size and shape of my body and, where my center of gravity was. And I thought this book should have been written 25 years ago. I'm going to write it so that other women don't feel intimidated by going outside and don't lose the opportunity to get the benefits from outdoor experiences because of either a lack of skill set or fear or the lack of just being given permission to assert oneself. So it was easy for me to pivot to that.
Oh, that's great. So one of the things, I haven't read your whole book on that one, but one of the points that I like, you came to a point where you realized that sometimes you knew more than the male counterparts, but you kind of hesitated in being, like you talk about on a boat, or what was it, a raft or something, what kind of a boat, and you knew more how to guide and direct than the guy that was doing it, and yet you held back, and then you realized this is not a good thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I spent a lot of my 20s sort of getting into situations that ended up being dangerous because I was deferring to my male counterparts with this sort of assumption that because of their maleness, that they would somehow be correct, that they did know which way to go, or that they had better boating skills than me. And in fact, I would say that was aided by a certain male bravado that I think that they were conditioned to put on, regardless of their skill set. I think that they were sort of, coached into I'm a man, and so clearly I must know which way to go. And really, that is not the best way to determine which way to go in the wilderness. Like, gender just shouldn't be it.
I love that point because it's so true. So often sometimes it's not even with male. It's just we think somebody else has maybe a little better perspective than we do. We kind of put ourselves down before others. I think there's definitely a difference between how males and females take on roles, but at the same time, there's also a difference between female and females roles. And it's how assertive are we for our own acknowledgments of what we can do. So
exactly, and it is personal, and it's just as important when you're in an outdoor situation, when you're in the wilderness, and you are your own first responder. It's incredibly important not just to know what you do know, but to also know and understand and be willing to acknowledge what you don't know. Often that's the piece that gets people into trouble.
Right. Oh, that's very good. That's very good. And I think that could apply to any kind of wilderness, any kind of undertaking.
And any kind of large life undertaking. The things that we learn in the outdoors are so potent when they're applied as lessons to the rest of our everyday life.
What made that transition from writing a book for women, and then you also wrote one for girls, but then going deeper back into your maybe a scientific background to write your latest book, Wilderness of the American Spirit?
So in between The Woman's Guide and Wilderness in the American Spirit is a collection of essays that I did called Ground Truth. And that was the springboard to this current book. And in that book, people considered a memoir and essays. And I say, yes, but the memoir is not of me. The memoir it was sort of a memoir of the Pacific Northwest, long form portrait of the landscape and how it intersects with human experience. And I was using myself as an analogy in that book. And so telling personal stories. And what I did with Wilderness in the American Spirit was take that same concept and say, what can we learn from the landscape? What can we learn about ourselves and our own way of being? And particularly, what can we learn about this age of environmental consequence that we are entering from the land itself? And so instead of using myself as a long form analogy, in Wilderness in the American Spirit, I used the Applegate Trail, which is the southern sort of lesser known route of the Oregon Trail, as that long form analogy, because it's incredibly interesting route through a part of the American West along which the relationship of mainstream colonial settler America experience and history has really played out in these kind of stark ways. And so we're able to talk about development and we're able to talk about resource extraction really clearly without sort of the noise of metropolitan life over the top of it.
Okay. So then you took that book and then it kind of almost, I would say, propelled you into being kind of an advocate for environmental understanding and what we can do to move forward. How would you say that kind of went forward?
So I had started a long career as an environmental advocate, and as a teenager and as a very young teen, I actually started in the peace movement with part of my youth group as being a public speaker to advocate for peace. And as my interests and my education I turned that more directly into environmental work. So I'd worked for Greenpeace as a young person. I had worked with outdoor schools. I'd worked in environmental education. And it had become increasingly clear, especially through my time teaching at like community colleges, that science literacy, scientific understanding of the world around us was something that people needed. And it wasn't necessarily something that was accessible to people through mainstream science education. So storytelling became important to me personally as an avenue for getting people to start talking about these really pressing issues. And the reason that I like storytelling is that it transcends politics. It transcends socioeconomic boundaries. Storytelling is a form of community building. So I tell you a story, and hopefully that story resonates, feels something, and reminds you of a story in your own life that you've encountered. And then through that story, we have something to share, because we're certainly sharing the burdens and the outcomes of the American relationship to the environment. We're all sharing in droughts and heat and wildfires. And so how do we then all start to share in the healing and the catharsis that needs to come with that, and the change and the growth, and how do we start sharing in the solutions and not just sharing in those more complicated factors?
You're listening to Northwest Book Talk. I am your host, Patty Grasher, and I'm here today with geologist and writer Ruby McConnell. When we come back, Ruby is going to share some of the different ways we can find healing through nature and much more.
Discover Alaska Amplified. Princess Cruise Tours offer a variety of adventures. Embark on a 7-day voyage of the Glaciers Cruise, complemented by scenic rail travel and land tours. Accommodation on land include Princess-owned wilderness lodges, offering an authentic Alaskan experience. Visit travelcruisedesk.com for booking details and local expert guidance. That's travelcruisedesk.com or call 503-636-5684.
Have you always wanted to buy a washing machine and support affordable housing at the same time? The Clark County Habitat for Humanity store has tons of new and gently used building materials, including furniture, appliances, rugs, paint, flooring, and tile. Shop or donate at the Southeast 2nd Street location near the corner of Mill Plain and I-205. For a pickup, call 360-213-1313. That's 360-213-1313. They've got everything, and the kitchen sink.
Welcome back to Northwest Book Talk. I'm your host, Patty Grasher. I'm here today with Ruby McConnell, registered geologist and scientific writer.
So let's go forward with that. What are some of the ways that the average person, not a geologist, can share some of that healing going forward?
First and foremost, you will find that my messaging has not shifted. Go outside. The first thing I always tell people is really your outdoor experience, your own outdoor experience is unique and valid and important, because we don't assign actionable value to things that we don't have personal experience of. Right? So go outside, even if it's into your own front yard, go to your own city parks, go to the boundary wildernesses and the imperfect wildernesses in your life and craft experiences and share stories of those places, because then they will hold value. So then when it comes up time to vote for a park levy, when you're asked during a heat wave to turn down your air conditioner, you may connect those sorts of requests to things that you value. And it might change the way that you behave in response to them, because you may add other things like enjoyment, recreation. It makes me feel good. I associate it with my health, in a balance equation between like, oh, this is going to cost me a little bit more money, or this might be an inconvenience. And those factors might start to outweigh. Hopefully. This is my theory.
No, that's very good. I like that. And one of the things in your book, A Woman's Guide to the Wilderness, I think, was that you said you don't have to actually put on hiking boots. If you're not maybe physically able, like get older or whatever, you're not able to go on those mountain climbs or those crossing streams with rugged terrain or whatever. So, but you put forward that any kind of getting out, whether it's in your RV or a little a fancy tent rather than just under the stars kind of thing, anything that moves us forward is positive.
Yes, and we need to become radically inclusive of one another's outdoor experiences. There is nothing wrong with sitting quietly outside. There's nothing wrong with that. That is an outdoor experience. In fact, it's an outdoor experience that maybe people should put more value to.
Yeah.
The sitting, regardless of your physical ability, I myself am guilty of being hyperactive in the outdoors and needing to consciously sit and slow down. And that has nothing to do with my physicality. That has everything to do with my ability to be mindful. That has everything to do with valuing observation over personal physical achievement. And there's nothing wrong with personal physical achievement. And there's nothing wrong I don't think there's anything wrong with going outside because you are hunting, because you are providing food for your family. I don't think there's anything wrong with going outside specifically just to pass on a skill set to your children. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that we need to be encouraging of all of the types of stories that are playing out in outdoor spaces. And I think that we need to also be mindful of welcoming groups and demographics who have traditionally not had access to the outdoors into the outdoors, and making it more accessible for them, because it's tied to our physical, emotional, and mental well-being, and it behooves us as a collective to have everyone have access to these kinds of opportunities and experiences.
I go for that. I work at a national park bookstore, a historic site. And so we're like invaded every Saturday with these Pokemon people. But it's like, at first it's like, oh my God, but at least they're outside. You know what I mean? There's like they're walking. They're like walking outside rather than being inside in front of their computer or their phone. And I think little bit by little bit, anything that gets us to hear and see and feel what's going on about us in a natural sense is good. Maybe that's the only way we take those baby steps for kids, or a lot of adults too. So
that's it. Exactly. I love that example so much. I can picture exactly what you're talking about. There's a Pokemon something outside at the bottom of my street where I live. And it took me a while to figure out what was happening. There was like people eddying in the bottom of the street with their cell phones. And I thought, what's going on? And it took several weeks. And I had the same response, where I thought, that's a person that enjoys video games and might otherwise be inside. And now they're moving their body. They're getting fresh air. They're experiencing, the birds singing. They're getting vitamin D. Like, this can only be good for this human. What do I care what they're doing while they're out there? First of all, it's none of my business. Second of all, they're doing it.
Right.
So it's great.
Right.
So celebrate it.
Yeah. And that reminds me, when one of your lists of things to carry in your pack, whatever, was a book. Like, yeah, sometimes you want to just sit back and read a book. And I thought that was kind of fun too.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's just something to be said for, even if you're just going to get a different soundscape. So many people never get away from the sound of an engine. And so just having the frequency, that background frequency noise, changing to those natural frequencies, I think it's very good for the human spirit. And that's how I landed on that title, Wilderness in the American Spirit, because I really think that a lot of the environmental crisis is tied up in matters of the spirit. And by that, I mean sort of American spirit and Americanism and American life, but then also our own sort of inner spirits, whatever definition we bring to that, in the most radically inclusive definition of that possible. And so I think that when you go outside, and most people feel uplifted when they go outside, and
Yeah,
that feeling of uplift means it's speaking to us,
right.
So I think that's part of how we know that it's good for us.
Well, I know that I've read somewhere about trees being healing. Just looking at a tree, there's just something about a tree that even the Native Americans believe is kind of a healing power, just being in front of a tree. But also, switching a little bit over, kind of been getting into a little bit about birding. People who go after birds. My sister is one, and I'm not a birder, but when you just all of a sudden you stop thinking and listening to birds, it's like it opens up a whole new acoustic sense of the world outside. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, there's so many cars, I can't hear the birds, or something like that. So there's different facets that lead us into more nature loving, I think.
Yes, I think so too. And there's a mathematics and a physics around it. I mean, they've proven this out with a lot of the biology, but then there's a mathematics and a physics to sort of encountering the kind of fractal complex patterns that are represented by natural systems, and how those are very good for our brain, and very connect to the complexities of our own psyches and bodies in ways that we don't fully understand yet, but that we do know have a mathematical patterning and basis, and therefore represent some system that is
Right.
taking place on a really complex level. Just because we don't have codified language around something doesn't mean we aren't experiencing it. And that's sort of at the heart of storytelling, right? Where I'm trying to get at those pieces of our relationship to the natural world that we know we experience, but that we have a hard time codifying.
That is very good because there's so many times you can take a walk and realize, oh, I didn't even notice anything going on till you actually consciously say, I'm experiencing this. Let me live in this experience rather than just trying to take a walk to solve a problem or something like that in our heads. It's kind of good. And a thought that just came to mind is so I worked in different times with people with dementia. And I know that sounds and things, music and stuff like that, they have said takes people back into their natural or their former state. And I wonder if there shouldn't be more people who have mental issues could find healing just by being in nature. I know they've done that with horses and things like that, but just letting nature kind of heal us rather than more pills and more examinations, more study, just kind of like letting go a bit and letting people find their own natural path to healing.
Well, typically, consider that typically, if humans want to punish another human, the first thing that we do is confine them and take away their access to the natural world.
That is so sad. I mean, I have that is a passion of mine is that putting people in a cell is like the most inhumane thing. We don't even like chickens that aren't free range. You know what I mean? It's like, well, I don't anyway. But it's like, and yet we'll take millions of people in America or in our prison systems. And it's like, for what? I don't know. If they could be out doing some good in the world in a nature sense, that would be so much more healing for
Uh-huh.
them and I think for society.
Yeah, and it speaks to your point of, why do we put our elders indoors? And why aren't, like we consider that a punishment. We do that to kids, right? Well, you can't go out today.
Right?
So it doesn't make sense that our elders who we revere, whose health we care about, and whose health we are trying to protect and preserve, it would make sense that we would go out of our way to give them those opportunities to be outside, because being confined, we don't typically think that that's good for people. I
Right.
feel strongly about elder rights. So
Yeah, right. Yeah, me too. So just before we kind of close down, so do you have another book you're working on or another movement you're going forward with?
I do have another book I'm working on. It's a really exciting project. It is focused on soil and groundwater contamination, so I'm sort of returning to my roots. I'm very excited about it. Basic Books has taken it on, and it is hyper local. The idea is that this is the environmental issue that we are managing to ignore the most, that may be the most pressing, and it is right underfoot, and it could be anywhere. And in fact, it is everywhere. And it's something that we need to pay attention to. But the good news is that we have an opportunity still to really roll this problem back and really protect ourselves. So it's great to get to write about an environmental progress where there is hope. I'm hungry for hope. I think everybody else is hungry for hope. So
Right. And finding hope in little ways as being still justifiable of doing something like taking that tiny step is better than no step at all. I
we can
think.
do this. Not all is lost with the environment. And I think that that's a message that news cycle doesn't make as much money off of. And the good news is I'm not a part of the news cycle. I'm just here to join it with as many friends as possible, provide us with a future that is bright and still filled with natural wonders.
Okay, I'll finish up with the last question, and that is, how do you think writing has helped you clarify your own understanding of the geological life and maybe as a person?
I think it's been everything. I think it's such a privilege to have one's vocation be a daily opportunity to consider one's place in the world and to sit with your own humility in the face of the grandeur that is the larger scheme of things. And I get to do that. And I learn and I grow, and my understanding of these natural systems increases with every book I write. And my love of the outdoors and my desire to share its value with other people has only increased. I can't say enough about the amount of gratitude I have for the ability to tell these stories and to have people who are listening. Because if you don't have readers and you don't have listeners, then you got to go do something else.
Right?
So I am just filled with gratitude every day that people read my work and that they respond, and that lets me to continue, but allows me to continue.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Ruby, for sharing with us. And how can people get in contact with you?
You can email me through my website, rubymcconnell.com, and you can find me across social media at Ruby Gone Wild.
Okay, so thanks, Ruby.
You've been listening to Patty Grasher with Northwest Book Talk on 99.9 KXRW, serving the greater Vancouver area. You can discover more about Ruby McConnell, her books, her writing journeys as a nonfiction writer on the Northwest Book Talk website, nwbooktalk.com. Click on Author Interviews. If you enjoy local radio shows such as this and would like to keep us on the air, please visit us on the web, kxrw.fm, and click on the Donate button. For all the volunteers and supporters who make community radio possible, this is Patty Grasher, and I want to thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you again right here on KXRW Northwest Book Talk.